Greetings from Breaking Defense. I'm Barry Rosenberg, editor of Special Projects. Our webcast today is sponsored by Red Hat, and over the next hour, we'll be talking about Special Operations Command networks, cybersecurity, DevSecOps, cloud, and the great power competition. Our guest is Dr. Lisa Costa, the CIO and Director of C4 at SOCOM, where she runs the fourth largest IT enterprise in the DoD. She controls a $1.2 billion annual budget and leads digital transformation and cybersecurity while supporting SOCOM's 80,000 plus users around the world. With a doctorate in computer science, she invented the first fully spherical digital video system and operationalized the first social media exploitation algorithms in the intelligence community, some of which were licensed to Twitter, Palantir, Google, and Facebook. Dr. Costa is at SOCOM headquarters in Tampa, and I'm in DC. So Lisa, why don't you kick it off with an overview of SOCOM, and then we'll go into our questions.
Okay, great. Well, first I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Fed Insider and Breaking Defense for this opportunity to talk about SOCOM today. I'd like to especially thank Peg and you, Barry, the whole team for putting this together. It's absolutely imperative that we build out our strategic engagements with industry and academia during this time of COVID. Programs like yours help us do that by reaching out to broad audiences to talk about where we're going and what our needs are and how your audience can help. Just to give you an overview of SOCOM, SOCOM is a global combatant command with a number of key mission areas. And we're also, not only are we a combatant command, but we are also service-like in that we are responsible for organizing, training, and equipping staff. And so we fall into somewhat of a gray zone ourselves sometimes in that we have both responsibilities. And so what is unique to SOCOM is that we have our own acquisition capability, much like the services do, to focus on those things that are SOCOM specific. And so we try to use as much of what the services build and procure, and then take those capabilities and add just the, quote, special part to them so that the overall acquisition bill is lower, and the O&M of those platforms and weapon systems is also lower as well. So that's really SOCOM. Roughly 80,000 users, multiple networks, multiple security classification levels. We are in over 140 countries on any given day. So as you can imagine, we have a very strategic, operational, and then tactical level of communications capabilities. And one of the things I do like to point out is that we're not just responsible for the last mile, we're responsible for every mile. So I think that concludes my
Thank you, Lisa. Yes, we just saw the slide there, the great power competition slide. I thought you might have a comment on that one, but maybe that's something that we can get into in our discussion.
I can certainly address that, and I'll tell you, we like to use the word rebalance at SOCOM, not pivot, because a pivot implies that you're not going to do counter VEO, and I think that could not be farther from the truth. Counter VEO remains the number one priority of the command. However, countering violent extremist organizations can be prioritized, and we can identify those missions which are of greatest value to the nation. We are rebalancing, and we have done a significant amount of move toward great power competition. Let's not forget that great power competitors like to use violent extremist organizations, whether witting or unwitting, as proxies. And so it's not that you have one without the other. They coexist. And we are in that space of where we can try to, go after twofer types of, economies of scale.
Sure. So it's interesting how you mentioned, the violent extremist organizations and how they can be used by proxies in the great power competition. I'm wondering, looking at it from a networks perspective and a data perspective and a cybersecurity perspective, how SOCOM will evolve from that traditional terrorist, anti-terrorist fight to a great power fight. How do you think your networks and cyber needs to evolve to make that possible?
That's a great question, and thanks for asking that, because quite frankly, I think the way our network is distributed is exactly the model of why you want to use SOF for great power competitions. Why is that? Because we are in 140 countries on any given day. And so we have that indigenous presence that we can apply to great power competition that I don't know of any other organization that has that level of presence across the globe. Let's not forget, great power competitions, that a local event can have a global effect. So I think our networks are very much aligned in the way that they're distributed with great power competitions. Now, are they modernized? Have they transformed from a kind of just good enough to do counter VEO to be that next level of, state-of-the-art capability? And I think that's the place where we are investing. We are investing in ensuring that those folks in those 140 countries have an always-up experience and that they have the ability to be able to operate in a mission command environment, meaning that they can be disconnected for, hours, days, even months, and still be able to execute commander's intent, but be disconnected from the overall, what we call the SOS information environment, or the SIE. So, that I think is where the investment is being made to ensure that we can deliver capability not in months, half a world away, but instead we can deliver capabilities in hours and minutes.
I think that's a really good response to our first question, which is about the emerging capabilities and disruptive technologies that you're investigating. And so you continue with the anti-terrorist fight. On the horizon, if not here already, is the great power competition. You talked about the need to invest in new technologies. And so can you go into a little bit more detail about what it is, what are the capabilities that you're looking to develop? What are the disruptive technologies you need to address the anti-terrorist fight, which continues and will continue for many years to come, as well as the great power competition?
Absolutely. So I'll go into a little bit of detail here. So we fundamentally believe at SOF that great power competitions is not about one single technology or capability, but that it's about the convergence of technologies that is occurring across the global space and the speed at which they are being adopted. So these technologies are fundamentally changing the sociocultural economic fabric of the societies that we're putting boots into. So we have to understand the impact of technology and the impact it is having on the people with which we work with around the world. For our own needs, some of the things that we're investing in heavily is 5 and Next G, how that will allow us to have a continuous streaming environment as opposed to intermittent access across networks. Of course, the Internet of Things, which is creating a really rich and global fabric of information and services that are coming together and really kind of merging the physical world with the digital world, and how individuals can be multiple personas online and how you try to understand that in the broader Internet of Things. Next-gen virtualization is another area that we're working, which is really allowing us to get after truly software-enabled hardware. We've said it before. We have software-defined radios, but yes, how often do you push changes to those platforms? We want to be able to do that again in seconds and minutes, and not weeks and months. CI/CD, continuous improvement, continuous delivery, using DevSecOps, agile software development pipelines. That's another area that we're really focused on. And this is not just a J6 CIO initiative. This is a whole of DoD initiative. As you know, Kessel Run has their own CI/CD pipeline. Army Futures Command and others have developed their own CI/CD pipelines. What's fundamental here, though, is that everybody's trying to get to the same thing, which is really a new model, an acquisition of software, and software as a service. So one of the things that has changed here at SOCOM is there is a new PEO for digital services in SOF AT&L. Remember, I talked about the fact that we have our own acquisition budget. So you fundamentally have to change the way that you acquire software in order to be able to continuously improve it and continuously deliver it. And so we're not looking for big blocks of code that require, the entire stack, and you're going to give me, 2 pallets of hardware for it to run on. Instead, I want small, cloud native services that I can deliver via a commercial cloud instantiation, around the globe, and I don't have to, acquire snowballs and move data and, physically move things. So that gets into our investment in cloud. We have a hybrid cloud initiative because we don't wish to be tied to any single vendor. So it's a cloud agnostic approach, and we have built that in to our CI/CD pipeline, which is based on OpenShift. And we've been extremely happy with that partnership in building out our DevSecOps platform. And then a couple of other areas that we really think are areas that will expand capability or democratize all of this capability that is coming at us. There are 3 areas. One, immersive augmented reality, where we can deliver capability, and the focus is on, can someone comprehend what they're being told. So how quickly can someone comprehend the information that they're being given so that they can make an informed decision? The second area is low and no code capabilities, which will allow the general user to be nearly a data scientist. And that's something we're very interested in. And then investing very much in zero trust, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. I won't go into that right now.
Well, that was a great overview of so many different things. It really got me thinking about this being a time in technological development that maybe we've never seen before, and is a great challenge for the military services. You know, when you talk about convergence of technology and all the things you mentioned, 5G and IoT, you left out machine learning. I noticed that, but that's right up there. Software as a service, DevOps, virtualization, software to enable hardware and networking, cloud, AR, zero trust. It's an enormous amount of technological capability that's showing up all at the same time. Do you feel that the resources are there to make sense of all of this and make it work together? And it just seems to be an overwhelming amount of capability that's out there right now. I'm just wondering how you prioritize and address the low-hanging fruit and make some of this happen. Would you mind responding to that?
No, absolutely. So we have 4 priorities, and that is global mobility, cybersecurity, enabling data discovery, and then the 4th one, it kind of underpins all 3 of those, which is operationalizing innovation. Because one of the things that we found is if you try to do innovation in current ops, it will always be deferred because the crises of the day will always take precedence. And so those are our priorities. So those technologies that I talked about are individual technologies that fit in those 4 priority buckets. So, you know, for example, if you're talking about cybersecurity, you're very much talking about zero trust. If you're talking about mobility, you're very much talking about 5 and next G and the Internet of Things and getting to virtualization. So these are kind of 4 buckets that we use to prioritize our efforts. AI and ML are very much in those key areas. In fact, this is an AI-enabled, AI-first command. So we are building the infrastructure to be able to not only implement AI, but perhaps more important is to sustain AI across the entire force.
Interesting. Thanks for responding to that. So let's move on to the next question, which actually flows into what we've been talking about, the challenges around network communications and how you are addressing those. So one of the ways you're addressing them is by putting those into the 4 buckets. And can you go a little deeper into the challenges you're seeing around communications and networking?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. The wave of innovation is fast, as you've indicated. It's what I tell our folks all the time is that, digital transformation, there is no, it's a journey, it's like life, it's a journey. And that doesn't mean you can't measure your progress, but we will be on this journey for as long as at least I can see. And the only differentiator between us and our adversaries, because they have access to the same tools and capabilities and a lot of the talent as well, is speed, disruption, and the scale of exploitation. And, so I think fundamentally we have to invest in those areas. The real challenges I think that I see is that, yes, this is a talent challenge. However, I would say that between the incredibly talented people we have here at Special Operations, and when you combine that with our ability to partner, less so in a kind of a transactional way, but more in a strategic partnership way with industry and academia, I don't feel like talent is the problem set that we're facing so much as it's a cultural challenge. To continuously be in tech improvement and tech transformation where it's impacting the way that you fundamentally do business, perhaps the way you select and recruit, perhaps the way you retain folks. That's the real challenge that I see. It's not on the technical side. We can do incredible things in networking and, infrastructure as a service, software as a service, et cetera. And again, a lot of that is enabled by our industry partners. But what's really difficult is that cultural change. I've actually talked to a number of CFOs, CIOs, et cetera, across industry to kind of get some of their best practices. And one of the best practices I've heard so far is, giving your people a set number of hours that they must do technical skilling training per month. And it's not so much that they learn that skill, it's that they are opening up their minds to a different possibility. And I think that's the important part of providing that time.
Interesting. Yes, the culture aspect of technological development is just always seems to be, in all of the conversations I've had over the years, and you, I'm sure with you as well, that always seems to come up. It's always about the person and their ability to take full advantage and their desire to take full advantage of the technology. So I appreciate that comment. The next question is about specific networking initiatives that you have underway right now. And the question here is phrased about recent wins that you might have. But I'm wondering if you could talk about some of the things that you think are of most interest and will be of most value to completing SOCOM missions.
Absolutely. I think fundamentally edge computing is a great capability that can reduce network traffic. And what I mean by that is, we move a lot of data around the globe when, in fact, AI and ML at the edge level, whether it's streaming analytics or whether it's just edge-based analytics, can really provide decision-level value at the point of ingest. And that's really an area that I'm very excited about in networking is, not to have to move data around the globe, for example, for someone to pet it and they're 8,000 miles away. There's no reason that data can't be processed and understood at the point of ingest and then potentially integrated with other data sources that are coming in from other platforms. So I'm very excited about that. It can play a crucial role in enabling user authentication and monitoring through, being context aware as well. So one of the things we're doing in edge computing is looking at it for biometrics on the battle space. So you could have this kind of increasing number of ubiquitous sensing and computing devices that are worn by military personnel or embedded within their military equipment. Like their helmets, their weapon systems, the combat suit, etc. And each one of them can be capable of acquiring a whole variety of, both dynamic and static biometrics. And that can do two things, right? One, it can do a continuous model for access to their systems, and it can also tell us how well that individual is doing. We have this term called hyper-enabled operator and hyper-enabled team. And so you can imagine that an individual working in a team can be producing massive amounts of data just within the context of that team working together. And that can be used to perform this context adaptive authentication in the wild, which, can be very empowering in a zero trust environment. So that's one area I'm very interested in. The other one, another one I would indicate is, and you mentioned machine learning, but through the use of machine learning tools, and we're all about operationalizing, AI and ML. Analysts can focus on the signal rather than on the noise. So one of the things we're trying to do is take AI algorithms and tie them together with different sensor feeds. And this is where our CI/CD pipeline really is important, because instead of having to deliver, again, an entire stack of software, now we can deliver just a couple of microservices that are required to monitor a sensor feed and then determine when something important has happened, and then just transmit that information. And those kinds of tools can really help direct the user's attention, whether that user is a breacher, an assaulter, an intelligence analyst. So we are very much looking at using AI and ML to take over a lot of the more labor-intensive parts of a user's job. And then again, I said I would mention, zero trust cybersecurity, and that has to be implemented throughout SOF. And why is because it fundamentally requires addressing this challenge of being cyber resilient. And we want to minimize complexity on the cybersecurity portion. We don't want to build fiefdoms. Instead, we believe that we don't believe that everything behind the firewall is safe. Instead, the zero trust model really assumes that a breach has occurred, and it verifies each request as though it originated from an uncontrolled network. And I think that is a key element for us to be able to take advantage of a lot of these capabilities, again, in the wild. You have to have a never trust, always verify mindset.
That's absolutely true. I think a lot of people, there's a joke when you walk around the trade shows, AUSA and places like that, and AFA, and you see all sorts of vendors selling zero trust, making it out to be almost like, oh, buy this box of zero trust. And
Right.
as you described it, it's a methodology. It's not necessarily a point solution. It involves, as you described, assuming the adversaries are already inside your network and erecting micro perimeters throughout to keep them from getting to the privileged data that they're trying to get. It's a fascinating sort of thing. Let me ask you another question related to edge computing. You talked about it earlier, and I'm trying to understand how it applies to special forces, at the tip of the spear. So I get that, an unmanned system that's collecting data through a sensor could process some of that data right on board the platform without having to send it back to analysts over the network. But if it's processed out there in the wild, so to speak, how is it actionable to special forces? How does it get to them without going back to the operations center or something like that? I'm just trying to better understand edge computing because it's becoming so important. And I understand the lessening of computing power and bandwidth on the network, but I don't understand how that actionable intelligence gets to the warfighter.
Right. No, that's a great question. And, I always give the example of force protection, right? So let's say you have a team that's out there, again, in the wild, and they have, they're bedding down, and you'd like to have force protection. So you've got this series of unattended ground sensors that you put out, and instead of somebody having to sit there and monitoring that stream of data that entire time, wouldn't it be so much better if, through AI at the edge on those actual sensors themselves, instead of having to pull them all together, could say, oh, hey, I've tripped. And then the next one says, oh, I've tripped too. And then there's a rule that says, well, if two or more of these trip, within so much time, I'm going to immediately, make a call to the, to the team, to the group, and message them immediately. So that's a good example of just an immediate use of being able to use edge computing, not requiring someone to just sit there and watch, feeds from 9 different cameras, coming at you. So, I think that's a very simplified case. A much more advanced case of that would be real-time or just-in-time logistics, right? You've got people and equipment moving all of the time. Let's say, weather causes, a group of aircraft to be relocated to a particular base, and that kind of kicks off this whole series of both logistics and on-demand maintenance capabilities that can be sent through the system without someone having to actually go in and type out requisition forms to have, mechanics and all of the equipment and parts and things like that are needed in order to conduct, maintenance and sustainability of those platforms. So, very simple to a more complex example, but all of these things fundamentally boil down to being able to be resilient, operationally resilient, both in mindset and in practice.
Excellent. And simple examples that helps me understand it. So thank you for that. The next question was about other things that you're working on that are turning out to be useful for you. Were there some other things that you want to discuss at this point, or we could move on to the next question?
Well, I think there's this whole work that's being done. I talked a little bit about it, but it's all about scalable AI and ML that's operationalizable for really the next gen soft warrior. And the next gen soft warrior is going to be enabled by really superior technology. And what does that mean? That means that, if you look at the CEOs of Fortune 100 companies, those CEOs are becoming increasingly more technical. Why? Because technology is fundamentally changing the environment in which they are operating their business. SOCOM is no different from that. And so, the soft warrior, when we talk about the soft warrior, we're talking about, the enlisted Navy SEAL to the 4-star commander that needs to be able to access data at will and at internet scale. And in the past, we haven't really scaled our networks to a 99.9% availability, internet scale, data streaming capability. We need to, be investing in all of those capabilities that allow us to get to providing the warfighter with all the same technical capabilities, whether they're in a tactical or a non-tactical environment. And that even includes desktop applications and services, maybe showing up on their TAC device or their, a set of nods, right? And they're able to choose an app and be able to run it and get information. And that's a critical enabler as we move forward, is how to integrate these technologies that I talked about in a way that has meaning to the soft operator so that they can conduct a successful great power competition mission.
Interesting. Thank you. Let's move on to the next question. And so earlier, when you were talking about the convergence of technologies, you mentioned DevSecOps, the Air Force's Kessel Run organization. I'm wondering, does SOCOM have its own Kessel Run? And can you tell us a little bit about how the whole agile development is going at SOCOM, and also specifically adding in the SecCom, the security part, because the whole DevOps concept makes it very easy to add security at the beginning of a software development project, for example, as opposed to trying to bolt it on at the end, and that's been the problem with a lot of software in the past. And so let's talk a little bit about DevSecOps. Interesting. You've made some excellent points there on the subject of DevSecOps. Thank you. So another of the technological developments that we're hearing a lot about today is network automation. Way too many SIM alerts, and analysts should be able to spend their time, actually preventing them from happening, rather than writing trouble tickets and things like that. And so I'm wondering what your views on network automation is. The whole idea is to free up the analysts to do more high value work. Is that something? Obviously, you would see value in that, but how are you actually going about doing this and figuring out what are the best processes to automate and how to better use your analysts?
Barry, that's an awesome question. And, I have this this phrase that I use a lot is we need to have processes that serve us as opposed to us serving processes. And I think how you fundamentally get after some of the network automation capabilities is to look at what are those pain points that are causing you to spend numerous hours of touch labor. And I'll tell you, that really kills us, right? Touch labor per device is something that is incredibly challenging when you run a distributed network like we do. So a great example of where we're automating is using Ansible. So we've used Ansible to develop automated playbooks, to develop servers, to push patches, et cetera, and really be able to cut the amount of time needed, to, for example, develop a data center server from 2 weeks to, a matter of a few minutes. And when you're talking about having to, maybe build 60 to 200 servers, that time really adds up. So that's an area that we are definitely focused on, trying to get to those, automating those pain points of that touch labor that really incurs a lot of time, and then fundamentally error. People get tired, right? If they're building 200 servers of the same type, I can guarantee you people get tired and they will get errors. We will get errors.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to put this into a reusable playbook has been really life-changing for us. So that's really an important area for investment.
For sure. And I know you're also investing, as per our next question, in standardization and open systems and plug-and-play modularity, all these things that we've literally been hearing about for years and years. But I think maybe we're on the cusp of seeing them happen. I'm wondering how first I'd like to get your view on standardization and how SOCOM might be using it. And then I've recently wrote a piece on Defense Enclave Services, the cloud that they're going to bring to the fourth estate organizations such as DISA. And some people have questioned about how you innovate when you standardize things. How do you innovate with standardization? And so it's kind of a two-part question about how you are approaching standardization and open systems at SOCOM, and then how it's obviously a good thing if everyone has Office 365 and can collaborate and all of that, but how do you innovate with standard systems?
Yeah, that's, I will tell you, I tend to focus on kind of the internet model of innovation, right? Which says, look, make your data accessible, and if it's valuable, people will spend their capital on innovating to use that information. However, there's this balance, right? There's this balance, and you do have to gain economies of scale so that you can provision, for example, data accessibility. And that's where we're using standards as a means to actually allow for innovation. It's very hard to innovate when everything is in shoeboxes and individual hard drives and not even accessible from the same network. So we are using standardization as a means to enable the innovator in SOF. And I really view every person in SOF as an innovator. So, that's how we enable people to be able to develop their own capabilities. It's how we are able to stay agile as an enterprise, because many enterprises end up being somewhat slower to react. I would say we have a great relationship with our service components and our TSOC, so that we're able to use them as innovators at the edge, and then bring that innovation into the enterprise for everyone when it makes sense to do that, and then free up their trapped capacity in trying to maintain those innovations so that they can go out and do more innovation. So it is a cycle of innovation that goes on within SOCOM. Not everything is meant to be accessible at the enterprise level, and we don't believe that it has to be. But it does have to be accessible to the level it needs to be at to be able to make informed decisions. So, we have an SIE data system standards for enforcing, the seamless transfer of data. We are, we have a data transfer process, that is important. Another thing we're working on is standardized memoranda of agreements and MOUs, memorandums of understanding for data access, so that every SOF organization doesn't have to go out and make an agreement with a data provider or a service provider. Instead, we'll do that from the enterprise level, and then anyone who is considered a member of SOF, which is defined in the MOA or MOU, then can have access to it. So we don't have to go out and rebuild. And then finally, I mentioned this before, but our hybrid cloud initiative, which is called Agile Storm, has a series of standards associated with that, so that we are platform agnostic, and that we're able to operate on any and all cloud platforms. So, I think that standards can be an enabling capability for innovation across any network.
Sure. Good response. And just a quick follow-up, because we're coming to the end of our hour. You mentioned a couple places where you're taking advantage of good response. You mentioned a couple places that were ripe for standardization, such as like the Agile Storm. I'm wondering, just briefly, where do you have too many shoeboxes? What parts of SOCOM do you think are ripe for better standardization?
Well, in terms of, I think there's much work that can be done across missions, right? In the past, and this is not a SOF unique thing, this is a DoD and IC-wide thing, which is, you develop a mission, and therefore you develop the processes and the data sources and file structures needed to support that mission. So now, really what we want to get to is cross-mission efficiencies. And I think that's the investment that needs to be made in terms of being able to get much greater value out of our investments that we've made already in these kind of verticals, is to slash across and do horizontal integration across them.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So our final question is about COVID and telework. I'm wondering if you could tell us how SOCOM is coping with that, what things you've put in place to address that, such as like secure Zoom-like meetings. I know you already have, secure systems, but maybe a level down where the greater SOCOM masses participate in, just like kind of what we're doing right now on this webcast. And then also, I've been seeing a lot of interest in better forms of authentication because of telework, such as CAC-less authentication, and I'm wondering what your views are on that as well.
No, I'm glad you asked this question. Before COVID hit, we had gone to Velocity in Office 365 on NIPRNet. And I was incredibly concerned that our users, again, going back to culture, would have no reason to use Teams because, they use email. That's what they've been using. Why would they change? And literally, as soon as we finished Velocity in NIPRNet, COVID hit. And I didn't have to do anything. Users were already on day one, I think hour one, creating teams to be able to talk to their distributed teammates, whether they were in the building or if they were at home or on travel or the like. So that was absolutely fantastic to see that the users just immediately were able to grasp how to use this. They developed even new ways to use it that we hadn't thought about, and they used it to not only do their work, but also just to check in on people, making sure the force was safe and secure. So that was one great thing, and Office 365 is, a key enabler for what we've been doing. We also invested in Wicker. So there are multiple versions of Wicker, but we were able to, this is a commercial capability for mobile platforms because it met the need that wasn't being met by Teams, and that was that we needed people to be able to use their own device if they were not allowed to have a NIPR or SIPRNet device given to them for home use. So we had to have people who could still communicate with their teammates, and they could use their own device to do that, and their teammates might be on NIPRNet or they might be on, another enclave. And that's been highly successful, really adopted across the entire SOF network. We got it accredited for being able to do HIPAA and PII. So for the very first time, our command surgeon was able to do telemedicine to some of our remote units. And, as she indicated, this was a capability she'd been asking for years, and we were able to give it to her in a matter of a couple of weeks. So, that always makes a CIO feel really, really good about the services that they're providing to their users because, at the end of the day, we all have to have a customer experience officer. One of the things that I would say is a huge lesson learned, we developed one before COVID. I'm really happy that we did because, unless you have nothing but users who love everything you provide, and as a CIO, I can guarantee that's not true, then you need to have somebody who's focused entirely on the customer experience and who isn't talking to them in tech speak, but is talking to them about the capabilities that we're providing and what they need. Sometimes it's just about education. Other times it's a valid requirements gap. I'll tell this last story, and that is that when COVID started, we were in the process of implementing a series of sensing sessions to get after, folks' discontent with some of our technology offerings. Once COVID hit and people started using Teams, they started using Wicker and other mobile capabilities that we were providing to them, and we were literally building hundreds of platforms per week. We had these sensing sessions, and our users were nothing but incredibly thankful for all of the work being done to really provide for a global mobile enterprise. If you ask anybody in DoD about mobility, you would say, oh, that's a nice to have, right? But if you went to a Fortune 500 company, there's not one of them that would say mobility is a nice to have. They'd say no, it's mandatory. That's our lifeblood. And so that's really a lesson learned, I think, for DoD writ large, but certainly within SOCOM, is that mobility must be prioritized, and it's not just a nice to have for leadership, but everybody must have access to it.
That's a great response, Lisa, and I've really enjoyed our conversation today. So we've reached our 1 hour time limit for this webcast, and I hope everyone learned some information that they can take back to their commands and companies to help them better execute their jobs. Red Hat has been our sponsor, and we greatly appreciate their support. And finally, a big thank you to Dr. Lisa Costa for taking the time to discuss the IT and network-related activities at SOCOM, as well as her staff for helping us organize this.